What is up, people of the internet? My name is Dabacab, and green players rejoice. We have 3 new green cards to go over, as well as a new black hero to check out. So to start things off, we have Satyr Duelist, a 4-mana creep card with 3 attack and 5 health. After the combat phase, you modify this creep with +2 attack. The obvious parallel to this card is Savage Wolf. Both are green, both cost 4 mana, and both get bigger over time. The issue, of course, is that while the Savage Wolf gets health and attack each turn, the Satyr Duelist only gets attack, making it not quite as useful as the Savage Wolf. This card is kind of like a diet version of the Savage Wolf. If you still want some sort of escalating effect, but you don't want to run Lycan in your deck, then Satyr Duelist might be the right option for you. Plus, I feel like this card is going to be quite strong and limited. Generally speaking, in limited formats, any sort of unit that you can put on the board that generates constant value every single turn is extremely powerful. So it stands to reason that a card that gets buffed turn after turn after turn will quickly snowball and become too much for limited opponents to handle. In Constructed, however, it's fairly likely that players will have answers to this and they'll kill it before it gets too big. That's why Savage Wolf is so useful. Even though the Savage Wolf gets much less attack than the Satyr Duelist, nonetheless, the fact that it gets +2 health means that it can't be killed by melee creep and that it can potentially become too tough for some creep to even deal with. So while the Satyr Duelist does have potential, I think he's probably outshined by Savage Wolf. So if you can manage to put Lycan in your deck, you should probably go that direction instead of the Satyr Duelist route. That being said, I can imagine this card being quite nasty with Divine Purpose on it. Giving this creep damage immunity would be a bit like putting a Stonehall Pike on a hero. Of course, Stonehall Pike modifies a hero with +1 attack each round, so a Satyr Duelist can actually outrace a hero in terms of damage output. Give him damage immunity and you can counteract his relatively weak body and ensure that he gets stronger and stronger every single turn. Next up, we have Emissary of the Quorum. That title is a mouthful, but luckily this card more than makes up with it with some impressive abilities and stats to boost. It is a 1/2/10, making it incredibly tough, but very physically weak. But of course, you don't put this on the board to smack into your opponent, you put it on the board for its passive. Every single turn, all you have to do is click that button and you give all allies in the lane +2 attack and +2 health, which is massive. The wider your board, the more effective this will be. It will hit both creep and heroes alike, so even if your board gets wiped by some powerful effect like Echo Slam, it won't really matter because the +2 attack and +2 health will stick around on those heroes next time they're deployed. This is an absolute game winner for green. Sure, you're probably not going to win the game the turn it comes out, but every turn that this thing survives makes it more and more likely that you will win the game. Because by buffing heroes, by buffing your creeps bigger and bigger every turn, they'll eventually become so large that your opponent has no way to deal with them and you will completely run over your opponent. So while this card is incredibly powerful and absolutely a finisher, you have to be worried a little bit about its weak stats. If you put this on the board, it can very easily get picked off by cards like Duel with virtually no punishment. Axe with a couple of attack buffing items will destroy Emissary of the Quorum and take 0 damage as a penalty. Overall, I really like this card and I can see it being added as a finisher to aggressive, wide, zoo-based green decks. Next up, we have Unearthed Secrets at 3 mana. This is a green improvement card. You play it on a lane, and at the end of a lane's turn, if your tower took damage, you draw 1 card. So first off, let me say this card is incredibly powerful and has a lot of potential. This is one of the best counters in the game to single lane decks like the blue-black aggro deck that we saw at PAX. If you put this card in one of those lanes, then you punish your opponent every single turn when they attack your lane. And in fact, even if the opponent isn't really pressuring a lane, it's not hard to trigger this effect. It's fairly common for one random creep or a melee creep to just squeeze through and get 1 or 2 damage into your core. So in fact, it's quite likely that you can get this effect to trigger every single turn. And to top it all off, this card costs only 3 mana, making it one of the few cards in the game that you can play on turn 1. So in turn 1 of the game, if you have a green hero in lane 1, all you have to do is pan out, check to see if any of your other towers are almost certain to take damage from a extra melee creep, Put this card in that lane and you will start generating card advantage right off the bat. I will say though that this card will be a little bit weak against combo decks or any sort of deck that has explosive effects where they just dump their hand and then swing in for massive damage. What this card wants is slow incremental damage that happens every single turn so that you can generate consistent card draws. And on top of that, I think this will be one of the highest skill test cards in the game, because being able to accurately identify which lane is going to get pressured and when to cast this card on that lane can really make the difference between a good player and a great player. The farther you can look ahead and the more damage you can predict, the more cards you will draw and potentially use those to win the game. One thing I like so much about this card is that it can be used to help you recover from a losing position. If you're up against the ropes and an opponent is absolutely dominating you in the lane, you can drop this card in that lane and then you can turn a disadvantage into a partial advantage. Hopefully, even though you've lost this lane, you can use the cards from that lane to help win the other two. This is especially true late game when players start to abandon the lane. If, for example, your opponent has beaten you out, completely wiped out your board, and has, let's say, a hero and 2 creep, and they're smacking your tower, you can drop this card in that lane, and more than likely that's going to be one free unavoidable card no matter what. Because if you've abandoned that lane because you've lost it and your ancient is exposed, it's actually quite likely that the opponent will not be able to move those creep or maybe even the hero from that lane, giving you guaranteed 1 card draw every single turn. The trick, of course, is picking the right lane. I can definitely imagine scenarios where you play this in a lane and the opponent simply abandons it and focuses their attention elsewhere. Overall though, I think this is one of the stronger cards in green because it's so cheap, so flexible, and it doesn't take much for it to pay itself off and start generating extra cards. So that's it for the green cards. We have 2 black reveals. We're going to start off with Slay, a black spell that condemns a unit. Now this is cheap and fairly flexible, but I have to wonder how useful it will be compared to other black cards such as Gank or Pick Off. Especially since those cards, while they may not be as effective at killing things like Thunderhide packs, they can be used to attack things like heroes. So I have to wonder if it's worth putting many slays in your deck when instead you can have more versatile cards that will help you dominate the board and take out heroes. Because in general, I would say that killing heroes is much more useful than killing creep. That being said, it is cheap enough and there are enough powerful creep. After all, we did just see Emissary of the Quorum. That guy can really be a headache. That I think that there might be a place for this card in some black decks, maybe a 1-of or 2-of, just in case you have a very desperate scenario where you absolutely need to kill a creep as soon as possible. But I don't know if I can recommend running 3 of these in your deck. And finally, we have Winter Wyvern, a black hero card with kind of unimpressive stats at 6/6, and we have just learned its ability. Arctic Burn is a 2-turn cooldown ability that when you use it, teleports you to an empty card slot in your lane and gives you +4 attack. This is a very flexible ability because it can be used offensively or defensively. If your tower is about to get smacked and you're going to lose the lane, you can simply hit this ability and teleport Winter Wyvern to that empty slot and use her as a blocker. Alternatively, if you want a more offensive option, you can teleport Winter Wyvern to an empty slot with no enemy opponent in front of them and hit the tower for potentially 10 damage. This is one of the better hero abilities in my opinion, but you do have to worry about that weak body. I think the best way to use this is to try to position for tower damage, because with just 6 health, she's not going to make much of a blocker unless you put very powerful defensive items on her like Fur-Lined Cloak. Winter Wyvern's premier card is Winter's Curse. When you play this on a unit, that unit is disarmed and its neighbors attack that unit. Meaning, of course, that the stronger the enemy board, the more likely it is that they will kill the targeted unit. And of course, even if they don't destroy the unit, then it will still be disarmed for the upcoming combat phase, meaning it's quite likely to die then as well. What I like about this card is that it turns your opponent's strengths into their weakness. The stronger your enemy cards are, the more likely they will destroy the target. Horn of the Alpha is a great example of this. If your opponent spends a whopping 25 gold to buy this item and then equips it on a hero, the incoming Thunderhide pack might be right next to that hero, which of course makes that hero an easy target for Winter's Curse. Target the hero with this spell and the Thunderhide pack will almost certainly destroy that hero. And if you're really desperate, you can use this to slow down damage as essentially a 6 mana disarm. The problem with this card is that it's a bit expensive for its effect. There will be times when the unit that you want dead will not have powerful units next to it, or potentially even no units next to it. If you hit Axe with this and he has 2 melee creeps next to it, then those melee creeps will of course do 0 damage because of Axe's massive armor. It does disarm, which is nice, but I have to wonder, wouldn't it just be better to hit them with a coup de grace instead? So it's just a bit of a pricey effect, and I don't know how reliable it will be, especially against weaker decks maybe that run a lot of blue cards, because clearly a Zeus next to a Luna, if you hit one of them with Winter's Curse, they're not going to deal much damage to their enemy neighbor. So blue might find this card a bit laughable, red and black might struggle with it a bit, and green, because they tend to have very high health pools, might also not be that bothered by it. So in general, while I do like Winter Wyvern's active ability, her premier card is a bit of a letdown. It's got potential, but we'll have to see. So anyways, let me know what you think about these revealed cards. Of them, which do you think is the strongest? For me personally, I think I'd have to go with Unearthed Secrets. It'll be so easy to generate card advantage with it that it's going to be so easy to generate card advantage with that improvement that I feel like it might be an auto include in a lot of green decks, especially at just 3 mana. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Thank you so much for watching. Dabacab out.